Welcome to episode 2 of Essential Reading, where I discuss what people consider to be a must-read comic story, but I haven't read it before. Today we are covering Spider-Man: Kraven's Last Hunt. This story was published in 6 parts in 1987, across 3 concurrent comic series: Web of Spider-Man, Amazing Spider-Man, and Peter Parker the Spectacular Spider-Man. Kraven the Hunter is a classic Spidey villain, first appearing in Amazing Spider-Man number 15 in 1963. Since then, Kraven has appeared in animation, video games, and more comics. Kraven lives for the glory of the hunt, and Spider-Man is his most dangerous game. So, real quick summary of this story. First, Kraven hunts down Spider-Man and kills him in the first issue of 6. And this is a part of a ritual of defeating his enemy and then trying to prove that he can be better than his enemy at what they do. So Spider-Man is his enemy. He wants to be a better Spider-Man, and that will prove that he is better once and for all than Spider-Man. Peter and Mary Jane are married. MJ is worried about Peter because he hasn't come home for a while because he's in the ground, but she doesn't know that, and so she ventures out looking for him. Vermin is killing people and eating them to try to attract Spider-Man to take revenge on him for hurting him alongside Captain America. Vermin has trouble remembering who he is, how long he has been this way, and even what his goals are. Kraven sees Vermin as his final test to prove that he's a better Spider-Man, and that will mean, like I said earlier, that he's beaten Spider-Man once and for all, so he tracks him down. Kraven knows Spider-Man had Cap's help beating Vermin last time, so he can be better if he defeats Vermin alone. Now Vermin, poor guy, has no idea that he's fighting Kraven and not the real Spider-Man, but Vermin has no idea about quite a few things. Peter wakes up in the just afterlife, has to remember who he is, and bust out of his grave. He realizes that he's been dead for 2 whole weeks. He does the first thing you should do if you find out you've been dead for 2 weeks, and he goes home. After spending a little bit of time with Mary Jane, he gets himself to leave, even though who would want to, and confront Kraven. Having defeated the Spider, the supernatural entity that he believes inhabits the body of Spider-Man, Kraven understands now that Spider-Man is just a man. He's not larger than life like he thought. He's just a guy. We find out that Kraven drugged Peter to simulate death instead of actually killing him, so that he could see that Kraven had won when he woke back up. Kraven manipulates Vermin to attack Spider-Man, who doesn't want to fight Vermin, since Vermin is the victim in this situation, having been held in a cage by Kraven, who tormented him dressed as Spider-Man. Peter has to fight back against Vermin in self-defense, and then briefly allows himself to lose control in his anger over losing 2 weeks of his life. Upon regaining composure, Peter allows Vermin to get the upper hand in their fight. Kraven stops Vermin from striking a damaging blow and tells him that he has fulfilled the purpose for which Kraven kept him, and he should go. Kraven sees that Spider-Man, though exhausted, wants to go after Vermin to prevent him from hurting more people. Kraven sees that Spider-Man is not only a regular man, but a good one at that. He realizes that while he's seen Spider-Man as a great enemy, perhaps larger than life most of the time, that maybe Spider-Man has seen him in the same way, and that's why they've fought each other for so long by now. Kraven tells Spider-Man to go after Vermin, and that he will never hunt again. Kraven, in his thoughts that we get to read, tells Spider-Man that it has been an honor to match wits against him, and says goodbye. Kraven feels that he can finally be happy and at peace, which he's never known since coming to America from Russia as a child. He lines up with a coffin that he has prepared next to a framed picture of him with his parents. Kraven puts his rifle into his mouth, and we see the before and after of when he shoots himself. But by this point, we are only done with part 5 of 6 of this comic arc. In part 6, Peter is exhausted and chasing Vermin while dealing with the post-traumatic stress of being buried alive and feeling like he was dead. Spider-Man tries to remember that Vermin did not ask to be made into a rat villain, but was experimented on by Baron Zemo to become the way he is now. Spider-Man is having trouble controlling his emotions right now because he feels vulnerable, violated, and afraid. Spider-Man tells Vermin he wants to help him come up to the surface, out of the darkness in the sewer. Vermin objects, saying that he prefers the darkness to the brightness found above. Spider-Man starts to run away from Vermin in order to trick him into chasing him. Because Spider-Man should be pretty easy for Vermin to defeat now, right? He's weakened after his fight with Kraven, being dead and whatnot. After all, now he's running scared from Vermin. Of course, it's a trick, and Vermin climbs out of the sewer onto the bright street above. What a moron. Vermin is easily subdued because he has become so averse to the light of the surface world. Spider-Man says he will call Reed Richards, aka Mr. Fantastic, to see if he can help Vermin get back to normal. Kraven is buried, having died with honor in his eyes, and maybe ours if we choose to see it that way. Is he going to stay dead better than Spider-Man as well? I think historically, yes, he did do a better job of staying dead than Peter Parker ever has. Man, so what can I even say about this story? For one thing, while it keeps the tone of a normal Spider-Man story a lot of the time, it is pretty dark and mature here and there. I could see this being toned down just a little bit to make an alright arc on the 1994 animated series that we all love. However, the part where Kraven offs himself, I don't think that would have made the cut. So, what did I like about this story? It's interesting to read a comic story out of context from this era, for one thing. Peter and Mary Jane are married, which never should have been undone. Peter is wearing a cloth version of the black suit. The symbiote costume is gone, but here we have him wearing the cloth version of the same design just because, and this is a real world factor, it was cool. The characterization of Kraven is very interesting. He's much less corny than we usually see him in cartoons and the like, which is most of the time we've seen him in adaptations, because he hasn't been handled that much. I last remember seeing him outside of comics in the video game Spider-Man Shattered Dimensions. He's probably shown up a few times since then, but that's the last significant time I remember off the top of my head. What? What's this? Must be one of those deep fakes, I guess. Well, anyway, Shattered Dimensions is a great game, and I highly recommend it if you can track it down, but that's neither here nor there. We get a window into Kraven's psyche here that I'm sure we get elsewhere, but I hadn't really seen it until I read this story. Kraven is obviously very focused on honor, but throughout this story, though we may not know it from anything other than clever visual and thematic foreshadowing, Kraven is trying to ensure that he gets an honorable death very soon. He wants to beat his white whale, his one-armed man, his mortal enemy, Spider-Man. It seems like he succeeded. This was very much a Kraven story more than it was a Peter Parker or Spider-Man story, and it works. It works because J.M. DeMatteis writes him to be a compelling character and plays the twist close to the chest. Kraven is also presented as a more tragic character, and while I don't usually like to feel sorry for villains, that doesn't make it any less creative or compelling as you experience this story. Also, this story doesn't have much needless profanity in it, so that's a plus. Give me that brutal violence, but don't make it harsh on my mental ears. Thank you. It actually wasn't too gruesome to look at either, as far as violence. They don't show much of Kraven's final act, just the grim beginning and end. So what did I not like? Well, it's not a major deal, and it's all long said and done now, so it doesn't really matter, but I'll say it anyway. Alternate costumes in comics are the coolest when they're used briefly. In real life, Peter wore a black suit, including both the symbiote, the actual alien, and the fabric version, for a total of 4 years. That would be way too long today, but I view some of the 80s and a lot of the 90s in the comics world as let's be cool, edgy, and extreme, so it makes sense why he kept the suit for so long. In canon, Eddie Brock as Venom had actually not debuted yet, and that was going to cause Peter to switch back to his classic red and blue suit, so as not to match Venom. Venom first appeared in 1988, and Kraven's Last Hunt was releasing during 1987. Overall, as a Spidey fan today, I'm torn. I like the black suit design. It looks really cool, but we always gotta get back to the red and blue. To read a classic story, and he's just wearing the black suit just because, and it doesn't factor into the plot at all, feels just a little bit goofy. It's not a major gripe, just a nitpick that I'd do differently today. There are so many levels to this story that you need a lot more time and a lot bigger of a brain than I have to go through them all. I think my interpretation of Kraven's goal is that he first wants to, as he says, capture, kill, and become the Spider. To truly defeat his biggest enemy, he wants to show that he can replace and be better than Spider-Man. In their final confrontation in Part 5, Kraven sees that Spider-Man has compassion for Vermin. Spider-Man could probably easily defeat Vermin. Of course he could, he's Spider-Man, right? However, he hesitates to use too much force because he knows Vermin is not right in the head. Seeing this changes Kraven's mind. He no longer feels the need to fight Spider-Man or show him that he is better. Kraven, we can assume, both hates Spider-Man as his enemy and respects him as his greatest enemy. I believe his respect comes through as he sees Spider-Man's compassion come out toward Vermin. Kraven has been trying to earn the peace that comes from death by besting his opponent. What's compelling to think about from here is, did he really win? If he may be conceding that Spider-Man is better than him. Or can we just say that he did win and then was satisfied and let Spider-Man go? Either way, I believe he feels that he has nothing more that he can strive for in life, and so he proceeds to take his own life. If you want to read between the lines throughout this story, I think it's pretty clear that he planned on doing this the whole time. He just had one last goal, and maybe he accomplished it. Maybe it changed at the last minute, or both. Other than that, a lot of it still doesn't make sense because he is insane. It won't fully make sense to us as we read this story because we are hopefully not insane. By this point in his life, Kraven has given in to listening to the voices in his head and having visions, both of which we see throughout the 5 parts of this story in which he is alive. Overall, I see why this story is regarded as a classic, must-read Spider-Man tale. It's a big deal that shakes up the status quo. The ending can be a shock. It's mature without any gratuitous content. It keeps with the spirit of Spider-Man as we usually know him. Kraven is definitely not underutilized in this story. It can be difficult to make Kraven cool and interesting, but this story shows that it can be done, and done well. Kraven is still an underused villain for Spider-Man today, but we got a ton of other villains with less use than him too. I really enjoyed this story. It was very different from how we usually read about Spider-Man, I think, with such a big focus on Kraven's side of the story. Kraven stayed dead, actually, in real life until 2010 in the Grim Hunt storyline. I actually read that, but remember nothing about it. So make of that what you will. I give Kraven's Last Hunt 9 out of 10 extra potent comic deaths. This story is dark, artsy, and it's one you'll remember forever. If you have yet to read it, even after listening to me spoil it all the way through, I highly recommend it. Thank you for joining me for episode 2 of Essential Reading. I have been Handsome Oaf, and this is Oaf Culture, and we will continue to stay ourselves until our contract expires in 2083. If you enjoyed this video, you can like or comment, and you can feel free to subscribe for more stuff. But remember, your viewership is quite enough for me. Thank you for being here, my friend. Have a great rest of your day.